Hey everyone, my name is Rill from RillsCorner.com, and today I am going to be reading you Drexil's Path, a world-building short story. In the decades of peace, following the First War, when Merchant City was still young and the Merchant King was still establishing her power base, she turned her eyes to the Whisper Mountains, shrouded in their everlasting winter. They represented an impassable barrier that separated her trade empire from more than half the continent. To get goods from the west, she had only two options: go south and accept the questionable safety and high tolls of Idumea, or travel by sea. The northern glacier sea was the safest and quickest, but only traversable for 2 months of the year, being frozen and treacherous the rest of the time. The southern sea was not without dangers as well. Heading south meant a months-long journey if she dared send her ships through the Straits of Onida, a feat few captains could accomplish. Yet the only safer route was even further south, adding more months to the journey. The western side of the Tirzan Continent offered goods of inestimable value, so trade continued despite the difficulties. But the Merchant King saw value in making such goods widely available to the masses, instead of only available to a rich few. Being able to bring more eastern goods to the western markets appealed to her as well. So she set her mind to the problem of the Whisper Mountains. With peaks towering so high you could lose them in the clouds, and a rhythmic, never-ending succession of winter storms caused by some long-forgotten deviant mage, the mountains seemed impassable. Every mage, sage, architect, anyone she could bring to her service advised her the same: impossible, impassable. But she did not believe them. Unlike countless others, the Merchant King was willing to implement unconventional methods. Unable to find solutions among the high and mighty, she sent envoys to all the known lands, proclaiming first her need, then a willingness to listen to all who had worthy ideas, and finally a promise of fame and fortune and even a name in the histories. Thousands flocked to Merchant City to peddle their ideas for crossing the Whisper Mountains. Unknown numbers even died in the snowy heights attempting to prove that their ideas had merit. Then, after 3 years, petitioners began to lessen, and the general populace began to say that it was indeed impossible, impassable. Still, the Merchant King did not believe them. One night, as she wandered the holy temple grounds contemplating the peaks in the distance, she stopped and sat upon a bench. An old gardener, a Yangir, half goat, half human, was working in the flower beds nearby, carefully laying a new path that wound its way gracefully through the foliage. His care and gentle draws of power drew the attention of the Merchant King. Impulsively, she asked the old Yangir how he would cross the mountains. One must note that for the Merchant King to do this was extraordinary for her time. In her day, Yangir, like most half-humans, were considered less than a full person. They were neither beast nor animal, and they represented, in fully human minds, a magical disaster on a larger scale than even the everlasting winter of the Whisper Mountains, or the life-draining of the barren lands. But by choosing to address the Yangir, the Merchant King treated him as if he were a full person, in possession of a soul and intellect like herself. The old Yangir, whose name was Drexil, was amazed. He, never doubting his intellect nor the existence of his own soul, had ignored most of humankind and in turn been ignored. He liked being left to his own devices. He enjoyed making his paths and turning the landscape into something beautiful. He had spent most of his life in the Whisper Mountains, but as age began to creep in, he found that he liked the warmer climate of the lowlands during the harshest parts of winter. The priests at the temple were kind and treated him well despite his mixed blood. He earned some coin with his path-making skills and watched over the years as the city grew. Now, here was the king, the woman responsible for all this building that he had come to like and admire, asking him if he knew how to get across the mountains. He laughed. "Of course I do. I've lived there my entire life. I know exactly how to get across, and I have ideas of my own on how a path through might be made to happen." Astonished in her own turn, the Merchant King exclaimed, "Why haven't you brought this to me? I have sent messengers and heralds to all lands and all people." "Pardon, your majesty," Drexil interrupted her, "but that's the problem. You sent them to all people. I'm a Yangir, and like all half-bloods, we aren't considered people. So even if your messengers had come to us, we'd not have gotten past your front gates." The Merchant King was silent for a long time. Unconcerned, Drexil continued on with his path-making. "I see. I've made a grave error and been blind to a resource that's been right in front of me," she said, almost to herself. Then louder, "You're hired." And with that, Drexil became the Merchant King's first half-human advisor, and always the first that she looked to for advice and lines of thinking that never occurred to her other advisors. Within months, alliances were forged with many tribes of half-humans, and contracts were established to begin building what would become known as Drexil's Path. Drexil headed the project, and for many years the great endeavor took the whole of his attention. He hired workmen based on merits alone and gave no thought to their blood's condition, only if they were able to do what he asked of them. With his guidance, ingenuity, and knowledge of the mountains, he plotted a course that went, more or less, straight through the mountains from east to west. The path was large enough for 3 full wagons to drive abreast of each other, leaving enough room between for comfort. The road itself was set with interwoven paving stones that allowed for the fluctuating temperatures of the storms. The stones were textured to provide plenty of grip for pack animals and wagons that would travel the route. As much as possible, Drexil graded the path so that the ascent and descent were a gradual, zigzagging path across the slopes. Along the edges of the path, and especially in the breathtaking heights, there were guardrails to protect travelers and prevent falls when the snow became blinding. But even with this precaution, the constant snowfall and regular blizzards made travel extremely difficult still. With the help of the Alliance of Magi, Drexil's solution was to harness the raw power of the storms themselves to fuel runes carved into the path, heating it enough to keep it clear of snow and ice in most circumstances. It was still not enough in the full fury of a blizzard, but Drexil had way stations carved into the mountains so deep that full caravans could take refuge there as needed. Way stations eventually became used so often that enterprising young Yangir began to take up residences there, building inns and blacksmiths and catering to the needs of all traveling caravans. To control traffic on the path, Drexil installed walls on both the eastern and western entrances. The walls rise up on either side of the path, impossible to scale, and high enough to block the sunlight for most of the day. The walls extend a full day's journey into the mountains and eventually taper off as the road climbs higher and higher. At the start of the walls are 2 massive, well-fortified gates, fully garrisoned with troops, though they have to this day never been needed beyond traffic control and toll collection. Drexil did indeed gain fame and fortune, and a place in history for his greatest work, but he also gained much for half-blooded people everywhere because of his bold, plain speaking with a merchant king in a temple garden long ago. He solved her greatest problem, and his people's as well. The end. I hope you enjoyed this production of Drexil's Path, a world-building short story. If you did enjoy it, please be sure to hit that like button, and if you want to hear more about this world, make sure you subscribe and press the bell icon so you will be notified when new stories come out. My name is Rill, author and narrator. The artwork for this video was provided by Candace West Illustrations, whom I will link in the description box below. I hope you were entertained, and have a great day.